In Vedic astrology, the most important concept that determines whether a planet is unhealthy or healthy is the planetary relationships. So each planet is treating every other planet as a friend, as neutral, or as an enemy. So the planets are interacting with one another through conjunctions, through aspects, and through sign placements. And you can think about it as if you were interacting with one of your friends or with someone you don't really care about or with one of your enemies. And imagine if you had to go to an enemy's house, how you would feel. You wouldn't be expressing yourself in a very fluid way, or you would have certain tension within you. So these planetary relationships are called Lajjitaadi Avasthas in Sanskrit. And it's essentially the state that the planet is in and its ability to express itself. So each planet or each force of human nature, you can think about it as having an agenda, and how well they can fulfill their agenda depends on if they have friends or enemies working with or against them. This video is a simplified overview of the sun's enemies and how they can hinder or negatively affect the healthy expression of the solar force of consciousness. If you would like the full extent of your Lajjitaadi Avasthas in your chart, they are an important part of my written report, and you can find that at jmvedic.com. So the sun has two enemies, Venus and Saturn, and we're going to see how Venus and Saturn's influence on the sun will make embodying the healthy characteristics of the sun more difficult. So let's start with Venus. Venus is the force within us that obtains things from outside of us for many reasons, such as for pleasure, to obtain things from the outside to make life easier, such as having a partner to help you, having enough physical resources at your disposal, or anything that amuses or entertains you that gives you a break from your work life. So the things that exist outside of you, and think about the experience of movies or art, those are existing outside of us. Venus is the force that we use to get a hold of those things or to enjoy those things that exist outside of us. So that's the key word, is outside of us. The solar and Venusian consciousness, they are directly opposed in this manner because the solar force within us is the deepest part of our self, the soul, what we're inspired to do, while the Venusian force is inspired by things that we experience with our five senses. You can think of Venus as our ability to bring things, and even more importantly, to bring other people and relationships into our life as resources. It's the planet of, it's not what you know, but it's who you know. When Venus and the sun are conjunct, or if the sun is in Venus's signs, and remember that the sun is debilitated in Venus's sign Libra, then the person will basically end up over-depending on other people while neglecting their inner fire as their primary resource. And it can cause a person to imitate other people too much and to confuse their own inspiration with other people's inspiration. And you can expect a person who is an art forger or somebody who copies master artworks as someone with a very severe condition where their Venus is very, very tightly conjunct with the sun, or their sun is in one of Venus's signs, because it has this over-dependence on the inspiration of other people. In the kingdom of the planets, the sun is the king and Venus is the diplomat who is in charge with dealing with the other personalities in other kingdoms. So if the king starts making decisions based on what the diplomats are telling him, and without thinking through the situation based on his own experience and judgment, what happens is that there is no longer the main decision maker making decisions, but he's taking advice too much from other kingdoms or from the person that's interacting with other kingdoms. So what you have are all of these contradictory decisions being made, because the final decision is not being made from a singular source. It is listening too much to the advice of other people. So now imagine what that would happen in your own life. And don't forget that women have a king in their consciousness. They have a sun. So it's not just about a male authority. But if you were taking way too much advice and counsel from other people, that advice is going to end up going all over the place, and you get torn in many different directions, and you're getting swayed by the opinions of other people instead of consulting your inner voice about what you should be doing. So the important job of the diplomats, or the important part of the people that are bringing information to you, say the diplomats or the ministers in the kingdom, they're giving you information. They are transmitting, or they're showing their expertise and bringing key facts or key developments so that you have many possibilities at your disposal and you can see different points of action. But you don't overly depend on that minister to say, okay, you don't say that you're making the decisions for us. They're just bringing information to you, and then you make that final decision. So that's the job of the king or the sun in your consciousness. They have to have that control, that ultimate final decision. So when Venus and the sun when sun is being negatively affected by Venus, the person is not consulting their inner self, their inner fire about what should be done and important decisions that need to be made, but you're just simply looking at outside sources as they're the expert, I'm just going to listen to them and follow their advice. Well, if everyone else in your life is an expert, you've got all of these other experts and you're neglecting yourself. And what, like I said, ends up causing is that you're all over the place in terms of what you should be doing with your life. You don't have a firm and stable stance and approach to what you should be doing. So what's very important is that you learn to separate your solar and Venusian consciousness. So we use our Venus for really important things, and we're going to cover Venus extensively, but you need to be very conscious about when external influences in your life are overtaking your internal voice and what you're inspired to create that's original and reflects your inner inspiration, and to not be looking and copying other people's inspirations and then calling it your own. So now let's talk about Saturn, which will have a much more deeper and destabilizing effect than what Venus has. Because don't forget that Venus doesn't stray more than about 40 degrees away from the sun at any point. So it's very common to have Venus conjunct the sun. So many people will experience what I was just describing about confusing other people's opinions and advice and then consulting your own. The closer Venus is, the more the sun will have difficulty in making those firm decisions because of Venus being too close. And 2 out of 12 people are going to have the sun in either Taurus or Libra. So the Venusian effect on the sun isn't as intense as the Saturnian effect on the sun is. So Saturn is the force of human nature that makes us aware of the inevitable limitations in life. And the ultimate limitation is the body's longevity. We eventually die. But the sun is, again, very much the opposite of Saturn, like it's very much the opposite of Venus. Because the sun is the aspect of human nature that sees this eternal element of ourself, the part of us that never dies, and having this vision for the future that carries on even after we die. So this conflict between the solar and Saturnian consciousness is aptly summed up in the idea of transhumanism. You have this desire to live forever in a material body versus understanding the limitations of the body and that it wears down and expires at a certain point. So the sun is this eternal part of us, and Saturn is this inevitability of death. So with transhumanism, it's wanting to make the Saturn part of you eternal, making the body eternal, or to transfer the soul into to transfer that eternal aspect of yourself, the attempt to transfer that spiritual part of you into another body. And essentially the people who have this transhumanism ideal, they're having a Saturn and Sun confusion. They're wrapped up and they're totally divided and not understanding what part of us is eternal and what part of us dies, and being able to accept that inevitability. So the sun is living forever. It always lives. The soul lives forever, but the body has this limit. So in the chart, wherever Saturn is, it shows what part of our life we're limited at, what the things we're not very good at. And it shows areas in our experience where we just have difficulty flourishing at. So when the sun is being strongly aspected by Saturn, or it's conjunct Saturn, the sun's ability to shine as brightly as possible and to feel that innermost inspiration, it feels dampened or lowered, and that feeling of limitation, or that you're in an unideal position to express yourself, and or that you're in an environment that you feel is limiting you, and you're limiting your ability to express yourself and where you want to take your life. So that limitation aspect of Saturn, of kind of closing things in and constricting, when it's near the sun, it causes that eternal aspect of yourself to feel more restricted. So what this is felt as is self-doubt and insecurity. A person without a harsh aspect from Saturn, like a square or an opposition, or not conjunct Saturn, they don't have that feeling or that sensation of excessively questioning themselves about what they're inspired to do or what they want to live as and what their ambition is. But when the sun is with Saturn, especially, or when Saturn is getting in the way of the sun, these people, what they end up doing is they'll put up parameters or barriers around their inspiration instead of just following it with that sense of abandonment. Like, I'm just going to do this and I'm just going to get this done. And this is my true burning passion to do in life. This is my goal. So that feeling of being restricted, a lot of times it feels like that feeling of being restricted by things outside of your control. Like I said, Saturn are this inevitability, the inevitable limitations like death. It's out of your control. And so that feeling that you are being restricted, it feels like there's nothing you can do about it, and that causes you to feel that kind of fatalistic sensation. And what it ends up doing is causes the solar consciousness to pull back on its ambitions because they're just not able to get as far as they want because of things that they can't control. And so when you are seeing things outside of your control that you can't put your fingers on and you can't do anything about, it's important to really not let the inevitable difficulties in life hold you back. The sun is everything that you are. It's your eternal soul. It's everything you really are on the deepest level. While Saturn is everything that you're not, which is your body. So a pure solar conscious awareness tells you that you are not your body. You're not your name. You're not your gender. You're not your skills, your ideas, your thoughts. You're none of those things actually. Those are all material elements of your identity. You are actually an eternal being in this temporary chamber called the body, and it has nothing really to do with who you really are on the deepest level. But Saturn harming the sun gets in the way of that transcendental and extremely empowering realization. It's like saying, you can't do this because of X, Y, and Z. Be realistic. It's not worth doing X, Y, and Z because these problems are just going to derail you eventually. So it's a very materialistically limited way of looking at your life and feeling that there are these material things happening around you that you can just never overcome. Just like death, Saturn is the part of human nature that knows that there are problems that can never be solved. And that is a very good thing to know, what you can't do and what you can't eventually overcome. So to then just avoid dwelling on those things. And so since we all have a Saturn, it is very empowering actually when you're using Saturn healthily, because you know that there are just problems you're never going to solve and that there are parts of your life that you're just not good at, and you accept them. The sun's position is everything that we aspire to become and be good at with hard work, with consistency, and just the sheer force of inspiration. So understanding that the solar consciousness is driving us and it's driving this pure expression of our soul, it needs to do its best to separate itself from the Saturnian consciousness, which is saying that, we're all eventually going to die. So what's the point of doing anything? And that's where that Saturnian pessimism comes from. And we're going to really go into why Saturn has all of these amazing attributes to it when we get to Saturn. But when it comes to the sun, it makes following your inspiration in an uncompromising fashion so much more difficult. And it can make a person feel very mentally taxed, and you can feel very drained when these two planets are, like I said, harsh aspects or conjunct, and in a slightly lesser extent when the sun is in Saturn's two signs. So the result of this interaction is most commonly felt as a lowered self-esteem and a wavering sense of confidence, and that one day you can be doing anything, and then the next day you feel the limitations and the doubts start to creep back in. And it gives that feeling of wanting to give up too soon or too prematurely. So these people can kind of go in spurts of, I'm so excited to be doing this. This is me living my best life. And then when a little push comes to shove and things are getting more difficult, they just want to, I'm good on that. I don't really feel like doing that. Their solar inspiration can get really hampered down. Saturn is said to have a cold gaze, so all of a sudden they feel frigid and not so inspired to do what they really want to be doing. So the reason why the solar consciousness becomes great is because of working hard with consistency over a long period of time, like we talked about in the sun exalted in Aries video. Climbing that mountain of your ambition takes a lot of dedication and hard work. And it's very interesting because actually Saturn also helps a person become great, but again, in kind of an opposite way of the sun. Because in any field of activity, in anything that you do in your life or following your ambition, there's parts of that ambition that you're just not good at doing it. Say if you're an athlete and you are following that, you love doing what you're doing. But a big part of being an athlete is having to deal with the public and having to do all those press conferences. Say you hate doing that, but you want to be the top level athlete. Eventually, you're going to have to get used to doing that part of the job. And so that would be the Saturnian part of your consciousness. Say you just can't deal with the media, or you can't deal with the public exposure. A healthy Saturn is able to deal with that without whining about it and just get it over with. Just answer the questions and finish the press conference, not dwell on it, and not allow yourself to self-destruct because you're having to deal with something you don't want to do. So the sun makes a person great because they are following their ambition with abandon, and their passion is burning and they get it done and they can do it for a long period of time. Saturn, likewise, over a long period of time, you get used to having to do things that you just don't want to do, and you can get past those and move on to what you really want to be doing. So doing things you don't want to do and just accepting them is actually a major part of becoming successful. But as you can see, these are two very different parts of becoming successful. But this Sun-Saturn complex that can happen to people, it makes the person want to give up prematurely because they see that life is hard. And it's allowing the incessant doubts, insecurities, and the attitude of fatalism to gradually creep in. And like I was saying with an athlete, if they have a bad Sun-Saturn complex within them, they're going to allow that part of the job that they really don't want to do to eventually overtake them, and it can cause them to not rise as high as they really want to go in their life. And it can go with any profession. And those doubts of those things that you don't want to be a part of, letting those hinder you and pull you back. So these people with a difficult Sun-Saturn complex going on, what happens to the sun, it can cause a person to experience levels of depression and this kind of slow or low vibratory kind of existence, and a lot of fear-based thinking. So it's very critically important to recognize when this is happening and to not ruminate on the thoughts about everything that could go wrong, and instead to visualize what you are going to be doing right and how to do those things right. So in other words, making sure that the solar and the Saturnian consciousness are separated and not allow them to get in each other's way.